Hanyang, the old capital of Korea, was what's considered modern-day Jongno, and the 5 palaces of the Joseon Dynasty have stood the test of time until the present day. This is Changgyeonggung Palace, built in 1483. It is the 3rd palace to be built after Gyeongbokgung and Changdeokgung Palaces. The palace was originally built to accommodate King Seongjong's grandmother, mother, and aunt. It was also the home to the queens and concubines of Joseon Dynasty kings. Changgyeonggung Palace was a secondary compound located east of Gyeongbokgung Palace, the home of the king of Joseon. Unlike other palaces, the complex is rather simple. Myeongjeongjeon, the main hall frequented by the kings, is quite humble by royal standards. Myeongjeongjeon is about 18 meters wide and 10 meters tall, while Gyeongbokgung Palace's main hall, Gyeongjeongjeon, stands at 30 meters wide and 21 meters tall. The hall is only 1 story tall, unlike most other buildings on palace grounds which have multiple floors. Another unique feature of Changgyeonggung Palace is that there was more room within the buildings. It was the setting for numerous stories involving main female figures of the Joseon Dynasty. The most famous one took place in the 17th century and involved 3 women close to King Sukjong. This is Tongmyeongjeon, where only the queen consort could reside. It was the most splendid hall of all in the palace, and where the tragic story of Queen Inhyeon took place. Queen Inhyeon was the 2nd queen for King Sukjong, and she was loved by aristocrats and commoners alike because of her generosity. Tongmyeongjeon was the place where the queen dwelled waiting for her king, who cast Queen Inhyeon aside for another woman because she couldn't give him an heir. After she was stripped of her title in 1689, she was reinstated as the queen consort in 1694. Central to this story was royal concubine Lady Chang Hee-bin. Lady Chang was known to be malicious and hungry for power. Upon Queen Inhyeon's return, Lady Chang buried dead rats and carps near Tongmyeongjeon as a way of cursing the queen. On top of that, she was said to have prayed at an altar in her own room for the death of the queen. As a result, she was arrested and executed in front of the very hall she wanted to occupy. By this well in the backyard of the hall, a lady-in-waiting prayed for Queen Inhyeon's return. The king happened to be passing by and overheard these prayers. He was so moved by the lady's dedication to the queen that he made her a royal concubine. She would become known as Royal Consort Suk of the Choe family. However, despite her actions, she would never become queen consort, as King Sukjong would issue a decree forbidding any concubine from becoming queen in the aftermath of Lady Chang's execution. King Yeongjo, the 2nd son of Consort Suk and King Sukjong, was known for praising his mother and bestowed the title of Yeolcheon. Queen Inhyeon was never able to receive the love of her husband. Lady Chang fell due to her obsession of wanting to steal the throne. And Lady Suk couldn't become a queen in her own right. These are the only 3 ladies at the palace waiting to be summoned by their king. Today, Changgyeonggung Palace receives an average of 3,000 visitors a day. and behind the walls of the palace still exist many stories and legends that add to the unique charms of the Joseon Dynasty's Palace of Queens. Jongno-gu in Seoul is part of every tourist's itinerary, being home to the 5 grand palaces of the Joseon Dynasty. Today, we're going to visit Changdeokgung Palace, built in 1405, which is the second of the 5 palaces. Changdeokgung Palace has remained the most well-preserved royal building among the 5 palaces. It is also home to many cultural relics. Old pictures show how the buildings blend in with nature as they were built along the foot of mountains. Changdeokgung Palace was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1997, with the committee saying the palace was an outstanding example of Far Eastern palace architecture. The palace became home to the throne after Gyeongbokgung Palace was burnt down during the Japanese invasions of the late 16th century. The palace received foreign dignitaries, and many royal events were held there. As it was the main palace, the kings of the Joseon Dynasty lived there. But today, we're going to talk about King Gwanghae. Although King Gwanghae was the child of a concubine, he led the Korean forces against Japanese invaders and was acknowledged for rebuilding a destroyed nation. He also rebuilt Changdeokgung Palace after it had burnt down during the invasions. But in the name of strengthening royal authority, King Gwanghae had sibling Prince Yeongchang along with many other figures killed. As a result, opinions differ when it comes to his legacy. Peace at the rebuilt Changdeokgung Palace would be shattered again in March of 1623 when King Gwanghae was deposed. On the day he was dethroned, a large feast was held in the backyard of the palace. One of his loyal subjects told King Gwanghae there were suspicious movements outside the palace, but the king ignored it. That night, King Gwanghae was deposed through the Injo reform for his immoral character, with rebel forces entering the palace through Donhwamun Gate. The rebels had the entire palace under control in no time. King Gwanghae tried to jump over the palace walls, but was caught in the end and exiled. The rebels set fire to the palace as a sign of successfully deposing the king. Since then, Changdeokgung Palace has encountered numerous fires and restorations before gaining its current appearance from the year 1920. Changdeokgung Palace is home to numerous stories, both good and bad. Be sure to check out a few of them before visiting the palace yourself. This is Jongno-gu, Seoul, and here lies Sejongno or Sejong Road in the heart of Korea's political history. At the end of Sejongno rests Gyeongbokgung Palace, the home to the throne of the Joseon Dynasty. The palace was built in 1395 by King Taejo, but the palace was burnt down during the Japanese invasion in 1592. Some 270 years later, King Gojong arranged for the reconstruction of the palace. Gyeongbokgung Palace was not only home to the king and the royal family, but also a symbol of the throne of the Joseon Dynasty. Its location is a prime example of Baesan Imsu, an important principle of Pungsu or Korean geomancy. Baesan Imsu means that structures must have mountains resting behind and rivers flowing in front. The ancient capital of Hanyang, Seoul's former name, is a good example of Baesan Imsu itself. The mountains in the north allow the city to avoid the frigid winds of the north while receiving warm sunlight from the south. Gyeongbokgung Palace is an embodiment of Baesan Imsu within a city that was already established based on Pungsu principles. So it's thought to have the best location within an already ideal spot for good fortune. While Gyeongbokgung Palace was constructed in the best possible location, it was hit by numerous fires. According to Pungsu, this is because it faces Gwanaksan Mountain to the south. The shape of the mountain ridges are sharp, resembling fire. In fact, in 1395, a geomancer and monk named Muhak-desa warned of ill fortune the palace would face. He predicted the palace would be hit by fire 200 years later due to the mountain, and in the 16th century, the Japanese invasion and the Imjin War brought the palace down. Hungsun Daewon-gun was behind the reconstruction of the palace, and in hopes of preventing another fire, a Haechi statue symbolizing water was erected. On the ceiling of Keunjeongjeon Hall, there are some 1,000 Chinese characters representing a dragon, and they are assembled to look like the character Su for water. There is a large artificial pond next to Gyeonggi-do Pavilion to further emphasize the symbolism of water. The pond made headlines in 1997 when a dragon statue was discovered while the pond was being cleaned. The statue is said to ward off bad energy and is currently stored at the National Museum of Korea. The palace complex receives a lot of great praise, and there's an amusing story behind it. The western entrance to Keunjeongjeon Hall's front courtyard is hidden by large columns. The columns are called Yeolju, and they were built by Hungsun Daewon-gun to keep western energy away. There is a group of randomly shaped stones in front of Keunjeongjeon Hall called Paksuk. The meaning behind these stones is that vassals should be careful not to fall in front of their king. If you take a look at the residential complex for the king and his queen called the Gangneungjeon and Gyotaejeon halls, the roofs are the highlights of the buildings. Most buildings have a top ridge on the roof called Yongmaru. However, this building doesn't. Many theories exist to explain the absence, and a prominent one says that since the king is symbolized by a dragon or Yong, the Yongmaru could not rest on top of the king, as the name contains the character Yong for dragon. There is another interesting detail about this building. You can tell that there's ondol or traditional floor heating by a furnace, but no chimney can be spotted. This wonderful work of art is actually a furnace. A network of pipes underground takes smoke from the furnace to a chimney located in another structure. It was designed this way to provide additional heating for the main building. Gyotaejeon Hall, or the Queen's Chambers, features a chimney crafted beautifully. Such craftsmanship can be seen only in Gyeongbokgung Palace. Gyeongbokgung Palace is truly deserving of its status as the home to the throne of the Joseon Dynasty. It lives on today as a prime example of Korea's architecture with great historical significance. Deoksugung Palace is where the old and the new, the east and west, come together. It's one of the 5 grand palaces of the Joseon Dynasty, and it's also the most modern structure. King Gojong, the 26th king of the Joseon Dynasty, was the leader who introduced modern Western elements into the palace. King Gojong began Korea's drive for modernization during his reign and is known as the king who spearheaded change. This is the main gate to Deoksugung Palace, Taehanmun Gate. In 1909, the palace got its current name, having changed it from Gyeongbokgung Palace, and the main gate was changed from southern Inhyeon Gate to eastern Taehanmun Gate. The Junghajeon, where the king undertook his duties, was originally a temporary residence for kings, but in 1897 it became the main palace for King Gojong. While Deoksugung Palace embraced modernization in its structures, it still preserved many traditional aspects. One would be Dapdo, or the central stairs reserved solely for the king. This is Tumu. It was a symbolic means of receiving protection from fires, as the reflections in the waters were expected to ward off spirits. And this is Junghajeon Hall. Here was where coronations as well as official ceremonies with foreign dignitaries took place. It's the most solemn area of the palace and also where King Gojong carried out diplomatic affairs since it was built in 1902. King Gojong is known to be the most receptive to foreign cultures. He was the first king to wear Western-style clothes. Deoksugung Palace, though, has seen its share of crises. In 1904, the palace fell victim to a large fire, and King Gojong ordered for Seokjojeon to be built. Along with Seokjojeon, 2 other major buildings, the Myeongdong Cathedral and the YMCA building in Seoul, were considered the 3 iconic buildings of the capital. This is Cheongkwan Hall, the building most favored by King Gojong. It was where parties and banquets were held, and it is the oldest building in the complex built in a Romanesque style. It is also where foreign dignitaries were entertained. King Gojong used these opportunities to establish Korea as an independent state. This is Hamyeongjeon, and the name means that everyone is at peace. The building was reconstructed after the 1904 fire, and it became the residence for King Gojong. It has historic significance for being the last residence of the last monarch of Korea. In the past, the Queen's quarters were built with the king's, but since the death of Queen Min, King Gojong's only wife, no other separate compartment for the Queen was built. And now we're at Deoksugung Palace in the night hours of 2013. The palace was opened to the public at night for the first time in 615 years in 2010 to pray for the success of the G20 Seoul summit that was held that year. Ever since, the night openings are held every spring and fall. Here you see a children's storybook performance taking place in front of Hamyeongjeon. The concert featured not only traditional music, but also jazz and fusion genres. This week's performance featured a combination of children's stories and flute music. May is known as Family Month in Korea, and there were many events featuring unique ways of storytelling, and all of the seats were sold out.
어른들보다 아이들이 더 즐거워했던 것 같고 더 깊숙이 빠져들었던 것 같아요. 심지어는 뭐 알아서 박수들을 치고 있더라고요, 애들이.
How about taking a trip to Deoksugung Palace, where history and modernity coexist side by side?